Hello, my name is Mike Woodruff. Welcome to Beneath the Headlines, where I have a chance to talk with authors and thought leaders about the ideas that are shaping our world. Beneath the Headlines is a production of Lake Light Institute. Today's podcast is the conversation that I had last night with Dr. John Owen. It was filmed at an off-site location in front of a live studio audience. Although it wasn't a studio, it was just an event. And John, who is a guy that I got to meet over the last couple of years at some conferences that we attend together. John's going to get a formal introduction. He has his PhD from Harvard. He's a political scientist. He's written a lot of significant books. He is a Christ follower. He's becoming a friend. And we had a chance to talk about the fragile world that we're living in, about the global order, about Russia and China and AI and anti-Semitism and nationalism and Christian nationalism, all these kinds of topics. It was an enjoyable conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Well, John, thank you for being here and extending your trip. About a year ago, we had Dr. Robert George. So I assume you know Robbie George. And I said at the start of that interview, I said, Dr. George, you have been studying justice and virtue and freedom of religion and freedom of speech. This is your moment. You were made for a time like this. But it now seems to me you've been studying geopolitical order and war and peace, and you've been studying you've been studying Islam. You have been studying the issues that light up the headlines. So this is your moment.
It's my moment. Yeah, I saw Robbie George 2 weeks ago on my own campus, and I should have said, "Why don't you come instead of me and have another moment?" But no, Mike, let me just open by thanking you for having me, and I'm so glad we've been talking about this for a while, and I'm very glad to be here. And so the world is so complex, and in my field of study, we typically need to find some kind of organizing principle for it. And so one way to put it is in terms of global or world order, international order, let's say, which for some has a kind of a sinister connotation, for others a benevolent, benign one. But I'll put it this way, and it helps me to kind of frame what's going on now. Since the Second World War, we were on the winning side, along with the British, the Canadians, the Soviet Union, and a few other countries. Since that war, the United States has had enormous sway over the international system. And this was in both the economic and the political realms, and I'll throw in the military as well. So toward the end of that war, the United States, with British allies and some others, set up a number of international institutions that were designed to prevent another such war and prevent a Great Depression that, in the minds of the people at the time, led to fascism, that led to World War II. So the horrible decade of the 30s and the horrible first half of the 1940s simply could not be repeated. And so the United States set up the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, what is now the World Trade Organization,
UN.
Right? The UN, NATO, all these alliances. This was a departure for this country, right? And one doesn't have to be a Christian to think this was the right move. I mean, it was bipartisan. All sorts of Americans thought it was the right thing to do. I will say it's been an imperfect system, but it has, I think by the grace of God, brought peace and prosperity to areas of the world that simply didn't have it before. Western Europe, France and Germany fought a number of wars. The idea of them fighting now is completely crazy. These countries got richer, so the quality of life, material life, improved. And I would say as a Christian, freedom of religion flourished for decades in places where it had been in danger. The Soviet Union ended up collapsing, of course, in 1991. And so this system the United States had set up really went nearly global. And if you remember the 90s, I certainly do, and I'm looking around, a lot of you remember the 90s too. That was a time of great optimism, right? My students can't imagine what it was like in the 90s to think that democracy and free markets were going to triumph globally, and that Russia,
China was gonna enter the world.
China, it's only a matter of time. They can't do, there's no alternative for them. And so there's still problems to solve, but they're not the big problems of the past, right? So a political scientist called Francis Fukuyama wrote a book called The End of History, yeah, and it's still a good read. People don't read it enough. They just quote it or attack it, but
it's a piñata book.
It's a piñata book, exactly. That's exactly what it is. So now the 90s were a long time ago. The system, and I've written in this book, the system that the United States set up and sustained really wasn't working so well as of the early 21st century. And I mean this in the cultural sense and in an economic sense. And the economics is the kind of easier to analyze. The middle America, rural, small town, working class America, and we have data on this, began to deindustrialize. Because in large part, not completely, but some of it's about automation, but some of it's about the open world economy that the United States worked very hard to achieve, bringing China into the World Trade Organization, right? I was for it at the time, not that my opinion mattered a great deal, but I was one of the people for it. It was bipartisan. The Brookings Institution in Washington, left of center, the Heritage Foundation, right of center, they were all for it. But what's happened is China is a manufacturing juggernaut. And so there's an economist at MIT who's done very careful work on this, said 2.5 million manufacturing jobs were lost in the first decade of this century, just from China's membership
in the United States.
In the United States, to say nothing of Canada, Europe, and so on. And there are political consequences to that a lot of us hadn't actually thought through very well. So the idea that national income rises from free trade, it's still true, but the gains in income are not distributed evenly. And they've been distributed in a very skewed fashion. So that's one problem that leads to the issues we have now. And another is cultural. There's a kind of a cosmopolitan culture that's and I'm a participant in this, right? I'm a winner in this, but it's geared toward urban, well-educated folks who like to travel and live abroad and so on. But there has emerged, really for a few decades, a different culture that in middle and rural America and small town America that has contributed to the polarization we're seeing now, right? And so this is not just a story of the it's a global story. This is true in country after country after country that are going through very similar things to what we're going through, particularly the mature, wealthy democracies of Europe. We have this in common. So there's something international going on. And as a Christian, I mean, we can, I can extend this to talk about what should the Christian's attitude be toward this? But I want to just start out by saying one way to think about what's going on is this international order that the United States set up and sustained, and that I think was on balance a good thing, not just for this country, but for the world, has really not been going so well lately. And this is part of what we're seeing ramify in U.S. foreign policy, in what's going on with Russia and China, Ukraine, and elsewhere. The system, it simply isn't holding.
Okay, so a lot there. Let me back up and ask a question for you to sort of, how alarmed are you? So there is my whole life, somebody has been channeling Chicken Little and saying, there's going to be nuclear war, there's a hole in the ozone, acid rain. I mean, you go down Y2K, you just go down, there's always this list of something is coming around the corner and it's existential.
Right.
And it hasn't been existential so far.
Right.
And I think you would agree that many things are going well.
Yeah.
That said, you don't have to look far to see people bemoaning the fact that, as you spoke about, we've got this rising nationalism pushing back on the post-World War II order that was cosmopolitan, globalization, and now that's sort of not working. We've seen a rise of nationalism, and we're seeing a lot of depopulation, and there's all these the institutions are failing. I mean, you get this, debt is rising.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just interested, as we get started in this conversation, how alarmed are you? How fragile is the world?
Yeah, I think so. There's stories you can tell about. No, we're just moving to a different system, what's often called the spheres of influence, which is more old-fashioned. You know, great power. Let's say, United States and China will each have its sphere. Maybe Russia, though Russia's not as powerful as it looks. Russia doesn't have a big economy. It has nuclear weapons and a very aggressive foreign policy, let's say.
But not a big economy.
But not a big economy. Smaller than Canada's economy. Then it produces, a lot. It's got some assets.
And not many people.
Not many people. Its main exports are fossil fuels, but it does have the most nuclear warheads of any country in the world, including ours. It has more than we have by a bit.
Has a lot of frozen land.
Right. A lot of frozen land. Yeah. So it has some assets, but. So we can put an asterisk beside Russia, but China and the U.S. is really, in my field, where the action is. And so one way to think about what's going on is, well, we're resorting ourselves into a U.S. sphere of influence, which would at least be the Western Hemisphere. And the current administration in Washington seems very focused on that. And China would have its sphere. The boundaries of that are not clear, right? It would be East Asia, but what about Japan? Japan does not want to be in a Chinese sphere of influence. South Korea, ambivalent at best. Taiwan does not want to be, reabsorbed into China. The Australians feel a little bit by themselves. And then if you cross the Strait of Malacca, go into Southeast Asia, there's a hostility or ambivalence. And then India, of course, wants no part of being in a Chinese sphere of influence. I've heard this in New Delhi myself. So I think sorting into spheres of influence is going to be traumatic. And the other thing is China has invested a great deal in the Western Hemisphere. They are Brazil's biggest customer. We are not Brazil's biggest customer. And so it's also going to be difficult to change that around. So another way this could come out is, well, the Chinese and the Americans get together and they figure out how to have not spheres of influence, but a single integrated global system where they somehow share leadership. Now, that could happen. It seems very hard to me to make that happen because the two countries have very different domestic regimes and norms, visions of what a good society looks like, right? There are, I think, dreamers in my field that think we can pull it off, but I am skeptical. It's important to remember the China we have today is not the China of Chairman Mao. It is it's a mixed economy. It's semi-capitalist. It is not as oppressive as, say, the Cultural Revolution China was, but still, it is not a multi-party constitutional democracy, and it is not on the road to becoming one. And so we need to think very hard about what that means for global order. Can you really come to some sort of settlement? So I don't know which of these is more likely. I suspect the spheres of influence is more likely, but that, as I say, that's going to be trouble as well.
So you're an academic, so you're not going to give me the kind of answer that I want?
I'll give you on the one hand and on the other hand. But
Right. I want just one hand. I want the one-armed economist. It's just not both, on the one hand, on the other hand.
Right. Yeah.
So, as opposed to 40 years ago, when we were going to grade school and we had nuclear drills of climb under your desk in case a nuclear bomb goes off. And the nuclear clock was, 2 seconds to midnight.
Yeah.
How stressed do you think, how fragile do you think the current moment is?
I think it's pretty fragile in part because I'll give you a couple of things. One is I've implied this, but I'll bring it to the surface. Whenever you have what we call a power shift, a global power shift, there's trouble of some sort. Doesn't mean there's going to be World War III. But what I mean is power, both economic and military, has been shifting to East Asia, particularly China, for a number of years. And this is not to condemn the Chinese or to condemn the United States for that. It's just what we call a structural problem. There's trust goes down. The Americans naturally worry, well, we're losing power. What are we going to do about this? Can we stop this? Should we do things to slow the Chinese down? And the Chinese know this too. So they have trouble trusting the United States because of the power shift, not because they're communist or Xi Jinping is a paranoid or anything like that. It's just the power shift. So that's one thing that just gives people like me a lot of concern. The other is this shift in both countries have shifted their stance toward world politics. In our case, the administration in Washington clearly has a very different attitude toward global order and the hemisphere. And Xi Jinping, on the other hand, has made China more authoritarian than it was 15 years ago. It is going in the direction we don't like. So those are troubling things. Now, I want to say I don't expect nuclear war. It is possible, but the thing about nuclear weapons, as a lot of you will recognize, is they're so powerful that it would be, when you have two countries that have enough of them, it's irrational for either of them to use them on the other, because each knows the other will retaliate in an unacceptable level, and so that deters either from attacking. So I think that's a robust deterrent. Okay. But nonetheless, the world's getting more dangerous.
Okay, so interestingly, you're talking China. I realize that this is part of what you've written on.
Yeah.
It's not what we hear a lot about. So, I mean, we hear about China and the threat and Taiwan and everything else, but I would say I hear more angst around AI and around Islam. And you didn't bring either of those up. Now, so let's talk about Islam for a second, because I mentioned this to you. 30 years ago, I had a chance to interact with Martin Marty, and he sort of surprised me by saying he just finished this big project for some foundation studying fundamentalism, and fundamentalism on the left and on the right, and Islam and Christianity and Hinduism. And he said, I'm more concerned than anyone I know about Islam. And you studied under Samuel Huntington, famously wrote the book, The Coming War, or
Clash of Civilizations.
And that was between the Western Civ, broadly speaking, and radical Islam. But you have pushed back on that, as I understand. So talk a little bit about Huntington's book, talk a little bit about what you think he got right and what he got wrong. But then, and by the way, Ayan Hirsi Ali, I listened to a podcast where she was being interviewed this week, and she was basic. So Ayan Hirsi Ali is the former Somalian, well, she is not former Somalian, grew up in Somalia and fled Somalia because she had a child marriage arranged, and she was trying to get out of that. And she goes to the Netherlands, she becomes a Dutch parliamentarian, and she's fighting for women's rights. And then Van Gogh makes the grandson of Van Gogh makes a documentary on her, and he's killed for making it. And the note on his body was, Ayan Hirsi Ali's next. So she flees to the United States, and she's a prominent, outspoken atheist, alongside Hitchens and Dawkins. She's very advocate, a new atheist. And then recently, like a year and a half ago, she comes to faith. And she's married to Niall Ferguson, who lives in your world, big books, lots of degrees, geopolitical strategy guy. And says he's now, the whole family has been baptized in the last 6 months, and they're seeking to follow Jesus. And so I've been talking about Ayan Hirsi Ali, but she's on this podcast and she says, I'm here to tell you, I mean, it's almost like, unless America wakes up, it will be overrun by Islam. And it was, I mean, I was a little bit surprised at just how strident she was. So, talk about Huntington, talk about Islam, and whether or not that's one of the factors that you think is remaking the world.
I did 11 years ago publish a book called Confronting Political Islam. And I started work on that after 9/11. I was working on something else, and 9/11 happened, and like a lot of people in my field, we better turn turn and look over here.
Yeah. I was on a committee that on September 10th had submitted a guy to get a PhD in radical Islam, and the committee voted him down on September 10th because they said it's not a topic.
Not a topic. Not
and
a
on
thing.
September 12th, he was approved.
Yeah, funny.
Like,
funny.
okay.
Yeah, come on. Actually, yeah, come on back. Yeah, so I don't mean to. It's interesting. Ayaan Hirsi Ali would say that. I don't mean to downplay that threat. I do think that the steps the United States and other countries took after 9/11 have done a lot to suppress the immediate threat to the United States. Now, some of that you see at the airport. I'm flying out of O'Hare tomorrow and, of course, go through what we all go through, right? I guess this is permanent, right? It's hard for me to imagine going away. But also going into the region and not doing it smoothly and making some mistakes. But the threat has receded vis-a-vis China. This is why I was talking about China more. But it's still there. We hear lots of evidence that it's coming back, that we you know, when we least expect it, this is when radical Islamist terrorists will strike. I don't know about the imminence of the threat, but I think it has to be taken seriously. And I also think it remains, I know it remains a force in obviously Iran, which is undergoing, if you've been paying attention, enormous turmoil, teetering, the Arab Middle East, and North Africa and down into the Sahel. It's still a presence, and into parts of Southeast Asia, right? It's still very much there. We don't pay as much attention because we don't feel like, the Islamist attacks in North America and Western Europe have pretty much gone away, and so we don't think about it as much. And also, the United States is not fighting wars in Afghanistan and Iraq anymore. We have troops, we have special forces and other troops in the area. We have the Fifth Fleet in the Persian Gulf, right? We are there. But so I agree with you that we tend to downplay it because it's not in the headlines. But it's a threat that I take very seriously. I think one thing to think about is it going to find, does it have or is it going to find the sponsors that it might need to become a more serious threat to the United States? And by sponsors, I don't just mean Persian Gulf money, of which there's plenty, but Russian or Chinese. And I don't see that happening right now. Great power sponsorship. I don't see that happening. The other thing you mentioned was AI. And here I'm going to plead, I have a feeling there are people in the room that know more about AI than I do. But I will say, last May, I spent 2 days at NVIDIA headquarters in Santa Clara, California, doing an AI boot camp, and it rocked my world. And that's already out of date. It was not, 9 months ago. It's already,
we're doing a Lake Light event with Megan Sullivan, who I think you know.
Good for you. Good for you.
And we had prepared for it a couple weeks ago, and I looked at my notes and I thought, oh, I'm going to have to prepare again.
You will.
Because it's 2 weeks from now, and it's
very
just
fast moving.
Yes, I can't.
Yeah. So what I'm going to say about AI is I'm convinced that so there are many voices. I want to talk to you after Megan's here because I want to know what she's saying these days. There are many sober voices and reasonable voices that say we should hit the pause button or slow things down. We don't know where this is going, particularly agentic AI, so-called, the alignment problem, where, in another few months or maybe years, we're not going to be able to even know if the AIs share human goals. I don't know. I'm skeptical that we can pause because we are in a race with China in AI. And every time I talk to someone who wants to pause it, I will always say, well, would you want China to win? NVIDIA says they're about 18 months behind in semiconductors, the fancy, the ones that NVIDIA makes. China is selling 18-month-old, let's put it that way.
Which is prehistoric.
Prehistoric, exactly, even before I was out in California. But the Chinese have other advantages. The Chinese are way ahead of us in robotics. And if you combine AI with robots, I mean, you can find this on YouTube, the remarkable things that are happening with robotics here. And so because it reminds me of the Manhattan Project in World War II, where we thought we were in a race with Germany. It turns out Germany was not devoting many resources to atomic weapons. We thought they were, and so we were pedal to the metal. This reminds me of that. We have had to live with the consequences of nuclear weapons ever since. And it was the right bet at the time because for all we knew, Nazi Germany would get the bomb first. Similarly, I would, if we're going to have AI, I think for all our problems, I would rather the United States be the leader than China. So,
okay, so I have like 30 other topics, so I'm going to move us on.
all right.
I want to ask one question, though, about China before we leave it, and that is, so I'm preaching tomorrow on Revelation 18, which is the collapse of Babylon, and one of the things that comes out in the collapse of Babylon is that in 1 hour, 3 times, in 1 hour, the great city collapsed, in 1 hour, in 1 hour, in 1 hour. Yeah. So they keep saying the collapses happen quickly, which was my take on the fall of the Soviet Union. Ooh. It was like, we're worried about it, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait, it's coming apart. Like, I didn't see this happening. So I listen to podcasts that say, China, they're going to do this, they're ahead of us, they got the biggest, these aircraft carriers, all these nuclear plants, they got all this stuff. And then I hear other people saying, China is a paper tiger, they don't have enough women, they're going to collapse. They were trying to get powerful or trying to get rich before they ran out of people, and it's not going to happen, and Xi is in serious hurt. So I wonder, with Islam and China, are these possibly going to collapse? I mean, ultimately, I believe as a Christian that, and I'm not suggesting the Chinese or Muslims are evil, but I believe evil empires will collapse. They will fall. I'm not a doomer. God is in charge of whatever's going to happen.
Right.
But are you bullish on China? I mean,
ultimately, no. I want to be careful. So I also don't want to conflate. So I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and in an evangelical milieu that sometimes conflated the United States with the kingdom of God, and so we would read into Scripture, oh, that's that's
God
us,
and God,
that's us,
yes,
all that,
yep.
and so that I don't buy that, and I want to be careful that America's not in the Bible and will pass away as well at some point. Jesus will set up His kingdom on earth, and it won't be I love our country, but it will not be our country. And so it might be, I pray that God always will have mercy on our country. I praise Him for the good things He's done in our world, through our country, and within our borders, right? And I think we can still be a blessing to the human race by His grace. I also think you're spot on to say we can't lapse in thinking China and Muslims are evil, right? Good in the line of, as Dostoevsky said, runs through all of us, right? In all of our societies, I think. That said, the regime of China is, I think, a bad regime. It's highly, highly oppressive. I know I have, well, I'll give you a little anecdote. I'll keep this short, about Christians in China. So I've been to China a few times. Some people in the room have been many more times than I. And the first time I went was meeting with a Christian Westerner in Shanghai. He was a reporter. And he said, it's funny, John, you would come here now. My wife and I are about to leave China permanently. I said, really? Tell me. He said, yeah, we have a Bible study in our church and meet every week. And the other night, there was a knock on the door about midnight, and it was the police. And they said, hello, we noticed your Bible study has grown to about 20 people. We think it would be a good idea for you to divide into 2 Bible studies. Have a good evening. And so they realized what was going on. Somebody in the Bible study was, a commissar. and so the party, this is not only about secret police, but the party is determined. It's allowing churches and Christians to do their things, but in small numbers. It is threatened by concentrations. Any concentrated group that is not part of the party, it spooks the regime, right? And so this is not a regime. Now God, the Holy Spirit is at work in China. I look forward to the day when we discover all of our brothers and sisters. I have no doubt there are many more than we think. But it is an oppressive regime. And then you have Islamist regimes also that I don't need to go into that. But in addition, they're highly anti-Semitic as well. And so these I dare say, again, without saying these are thoroughly evil, there's nothing, God can't work in or through them. They're bad. And I think, I do think that I pray that God will bring them to heel at some point. I also think as a social scientist that say the Chinese regime, for all of its skill and cleverness in dealing with industrialization and now with AI and all sorts of things. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party is quite adept. It's much more adept than the Soviet Communist Party was at dealing with modern conditions, partly because they have studied the collapse of the Soviet Union much more closely than we have. They have an entire think tank devoted just to that. And they're determined not to make the mistakes of the Soviet Union. Nonetheless, I don't think the way they have, it's close to it's a capitalist economy, but the state is heavily, heavily intrusive. Also, middle-class people don't like, over time, living under such an oppressive regime. They just don't like it. And so we know in case after case, eventually these regimes show their brittleness and start to collapse. So I think the smart money in the long run is still on China not succeeding, but it's lasting much longer and is much stronger than people like me thought it would be.
Okay. So let's let China take care of itself for a second.
Yeah, right.
And come here. So
yeah.
You started by talking about the post-World War II world was moving towards globalization, and the IMF and EU and all these things come together. And then all of a sudden, it starts to back up. Brexit and the rise of these strong leaders that are sort of pushing back on, we've got these populism movements, and there's suddenly democracy may not be a good thing, and freedom of speech may not be a good thing, and I used to point out to people that were having illiberal views that they were being illiberal. And then at some point it's like, oh, you actually want to be illiberal. Like you're not apologizing for it. You're saying, no, this is the right way to go. And I was like, oh, this is a different world than I thought. So we're seeing there's all kinds of very strong leaders, Modi and Putin and Trump and Netanyahu and Erdogan. Where is the populism and the nationalism likely to go next? Is there a soft landing on this?
Yeah, I think you will see more of it in Western Europe. There's some powerful populist parties.
You'll see more populism in Western Europe.
You will. Well, their party's already quite, in France, the most popular party in the UK is the Reform Party, not Labour. And certainly not the Conservatives. It's Reform, which is Nigel Farage's party, right? France, Germany, the Alternative for Germany is quite popular. It's the old Social Democratic Party is pathetic, and the Christian Democrats are holding on, but so I think we may see some more populist-run governments in Europe. The future of it in other parts of the world really depends on, I think, partly on the leadership and its ability to kind of consolidate power and become, rational and that sound very social scientific, but institutionalize power and come up with regular, predictable ways to exercise power rather than to be simply disruptive all the time. Disruption works for a while. It helps you set up, especially when you have a lot of discontented people. But if you want to govern in the long run, you need to institutionalize and become more predictable. Strike bargains with the business community, with the investors, with even the trade unions and so on across countries. So I don't know if populism, broadly speaking, has that in its DNA. I'm not sure. And maybe in some countries it can do it, but I'm just not sure. So in other words, some of the kind of pinball-like policy swerves, again, in the short term, they can be quite successful, but in the long term, I don't think they work very well.
So let me stay on that theme for a second
Yeah.
and touch the third rail.
Sure.
Let's talk about
Which one?
Let's
Yeah,
talk
exactly.
about
Which
Christian nationalism for a second.
Yeah, sure.
So we had a couple months ago, we had Rusty Reno, and I know you just wrote an article for
Yeah,
First
yeah.
Things that didn't go over well, as I understand it.
Well, Rusty liked it, and I was grateful that he printed it. But I think some of his colleagues weren't crazy about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so Reno kept saying he was a Christian nationalist, and I kept saying, okay, well, that's a loaded term. Like, and then he would say, well, I'm a Christian, and I believe in the nation state. And I go, yeah, well, okay, so do I, but that's not really what the term means. And I gathered a couple weeks ago, a few of us gathered in this room to have an extended conversation about Christian nationalism and what it was and where's it going and how do we pastor churches in this moment. And we noted that, I mean, Chuck Colson was a Christian nationalist on the one hand. If you're going to say, I think Judeo-Christian values are best and I want a government that sort of recognizes them and leans into them. Okay, so that's at one level, that's Christian nationalism. And then you move up and you got Rusty, and then you could go, okay, then you've got, I don't know, you've got some other people, and then you get to Tucker Carlson, and you get to Nick Fuentes, and it's this white, radical, Aryan, Nazi affirming.
Yeah.
So what is Christian nationalism, and where do you think that goes?
Yeah. Well, let's see. It's hard to pin down what it means. You've just illustrated that by talking about this spectrum of people, all of whom the term, the term could apply to all of them, and they're quite different from each other. So Rusty Reno is quite far from Nick Fuentes on a number of reasons, a number of things, right? Nick Fuentes is a pagan, I think. He's not so just to start with. So I think...
But he's popular.
He's very popular, yeah. So... Let me talk for a second about just the word nationalism, what it connotes. I wrote a piece in the Hedgehog Review some months ago, I guess last year, about nationalism, the different forms of it. I consider, if you regard nationalism as a devotion to one's nation, just as one is more devoted, one can love the human race and ought to, but have a special love for one's family, as I think one also. Loving one's family doesn't mean one hates the human race. By analogy, one can love one's nation, but also love the human race, not despise the human race, but feel a special devotion, special obligations and duty to one's nation.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good starting place.
Where he said, when asked if he was what he thought about patriotism, he goes, "Oh, I'm in favor of patriotism. I just don't think it's as good as agape love." Right?
Yeah,
and
right.
so we recognize. But
no, that's right. That's as always very well put by him. So I know Christians who think that we ought not to have any particular love of our nation, that because Christianity is, and I'll import a different word, cosmopolitan. I think Christianity is actually Catholic with a small c. It's universal. It's not cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitan implies there's some world polity that we're working toward and that we have. And I just don't think that's a Christian. Maybe it's a Christian notion. I don't think it's necessarily a Christian notion. I think we are embodied creatures. We inhabit space. And to pretend that we can have an equal love for the human race in that sense, I think is almost a Gnostic notion, that we're not embodied. We're sort of freely floating. It does remind me of saying, well, I don't have a particular I love my family, but in the same way I love everyone. So I think the Christian can and ought to affirm that. It's a kind of a weak notion of nationalism, but it's saying God has put us in these nations. They have They're not eternal. Let's not get confused about this. But God has put us in these, just as He's put us in families. However, we're not authorized, and I think we're prohibited from saying God loves our nation more than others, that we're authorized to look down on or mistreat other nations, to denigrate them. If you have spent time in other countries, particularly with Christian brothers and sisters, things can start to look very, very different about how God is working in the world, right? And I will say, some of you know this, we American Christians have a reputation out there among our fellow Christians in other countries. And it's not necessarily a good one. They think we don't really we don't really get it. That we do, as I said a few minutes ago, we conflate the kingdom of God with the United States of America. And the job, say missionaries should be going out and showing people how to be American-style Christians. And those two things are, American-style and Christian are like this. So that's a sort of, that's when Christian nationalism, I think, starts to go bad. And it's taken worse forms now, I think, wherein there's a real disdain for other countries and a kind of a willful ignorance of what God is doing in various other countries through His church. So it's a fine balance I want to strike. I want to say, I think about, this is not a perfect analogy at all, but I think about Paul's special love for the Jewish people, his people. It doesn't negate his love of the Greek, the Gentile Christians at all, but it's where he came from.
Right.
And you can see the passion in some of his writings for the Jews, for his people. So we're not the Jews, we're not God's chosen people, but there is some grain of truth we can take from that about where God has put us, and we have a special burden and loyalty. But we are also to love, we're commanded to love brothers and sisters everywhere.
So I am very conflicted around this topic.
Yeah.
And first of all, I don't see how it plays out, and trying to hold together a church that is going to be unified. Revelation 7:9 talks about people from every tribe and tongue and nation,
yeah.
and I believe that is God's call, and we will see that in heaven, and we work towards that now. And I actually think that there are, I get nervous when some people talk about American exceptionalism, but I also want to defend American exceptionalism in other cases and say, I do think there's a lot that America does better than some of these other countries.
By the grace of God, yeah.
By the grace of God. Yeah. Now, I think we're moving from some of it.
Yeah.
And I also find myself in conversations about where there are people who are expecting me to defend Western civilization. And I say, well, I'm a minister of the gospel. Mm-hmm. I don't think Jesus died for Western civ. Right. I do have grandchildren. I think Western civ is the best option out there, and I want to defend it, but I don't think I am called on to defend it as a pastor. So I find myself, and I look at the growth of an angry group of people, often young, moving hard to the right, and I'm sort of shocked when I talk with people who are younger than I am, who are much more conservative, and I'm like, I don't really have any experience
Didn't see that coming. Yeah.
Like, who are you and what? Right. I'm the liberal. Okay, I got to go back and figure out when the last time I called a liberal was. Yeah. I get called the fundamentalist, so I'm used to those conversations. But
liberal, right? You're a liberal fundamentalist. Look. As a descriptive matter, this is how polarization looks on the ground, right? I'm not going to blame the left. I'm not going to blame the right. I just know they're in this terrible, destructive conflict. Interaction where, and it's hard to, this has happened in various other times and places in history, and it hasn't gone well. It's hard to know how to break out of it without really hitting bottom. And hitting bottom sometimes means serious violence. The Spanish Civil War, if you look back in the 30s, we're not quite that bad, but we're getting there, where you had far right and far left, and the center just emptied out.
Yep.
Emptied out. The same thing was happening north of the Pyrenees in France, so that when the Germans invaded, there were French who said, you know what, I'd rather better Hitler than Léon Blum, who was the socialist president of the Fourth Republic. You know, at least Hitler is anti-communist. This is not where we want to go. And so I think I had not anticipated this lurch to the far right by some young, especially young men. But it is there, and in hindsight, it reminds me of some other times and places in history. I do think the good news is young people are teachable. They're more teachable than we are.
They're crazy.
They're crazy. Yeah, that's right. They'll regret a lot of this, but there can be a lot of damage done in the meantime, right?
Yeah. Okay. So, John, so many questions. So I just want to say I do think that there is a crazy cycle out there that, you know, the extreme people on the left say something and then the right reacts because the right elevates the crazy comments from the fringe left.
Yep.
And then the fringe right makes crazy comments and the left elevates that.
Yeah, let's raise money. Let's use that to raise money. Yeah.
You just want to say everybody needs to step back from the ledge. And and as Christians, we need to absorb some of that ugliness and hate and doom and say, God is, you know, let's love and serve, and I am not going to panic.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm running out of time, but which do you want to talk about? Depopulation or anti-Semitism? Behind door number one and door number two.
Do I have a third option? No.
Well, I've got more questions for you, but I can only take
I suppose I thought a little bit more about anti-Semitism. They're both big issues, right? Yeah. So
I am a bit surprised by the growth of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm in conversations with people who just come out and say, you know, but that's the Jews, and you can't trust the Jews, and you're like, you're saying that.
Yeah. I really thought we'd put that one to bed a long time ago.
And the Holocaust didn't happen. And
right.
How do you know? And you're like,
were you there? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I know. I expected, when the Hamas, that gruesome Hamas attack on Israel happened, it didn't take a genius to predict there would be a really serious Israeli response. I didn't quite know how sustained and severe it would be, and that therefore the global left would be, more activated against Israel. This is a familiar story. I had not expected the far right in Western countries to kind of rediscover and reenact, anti-Semitism. And I think the story there is complex. It is not simply the far left story of, the Zionist entity is that shouldn't exist and it's wicked by nature. It's more complicated than that, but nonetheless, no more justifiable. I remember it was last summer. A young guy. He's a podcaster out of Wisconsin, and I'd done a podcast. He's a Christian. We'd done a podcast episode before, and he emails me and says, "Can I get you on again? Because some of my friends are sounding kind of anti-Semitic now, and I'd love to have you come in and talk about this." So I didn't know about this. It's not I don't do social media. It's not my world. So I began to do a little homework, and then talking to him, I realized this is a big thing. So a lot of young Christian men, and I'll speak for men because that's what he was telling me about, have lurched toward this position. I think it's unreflective. I think partly it's a function of poor education. I think partly it's a function of the internet, the social media. People really are, as we all know, they're in bubbles. And it's hard not to be in a bubble now. I mean, I even have to resist this temptation myself. I don't want to read that. I know it's wrong. I know what these guys are going to say. They irritate me. I need to read them. I need to get out and make sure I'm not in a bubble. But social media reinforce our tendencies to be tribal, to read only what we agree with. So that's part of what's going. The technology is actually feeding this. The technology that Silicon Valley thought in the 90s would bring us all together.
Yeah.
And we don't need government anymore. We the people will be empowered. It's actually made us more tribal on the whole. So I think, the Christian church for 2,000 years has a spotty record on anti-Semitism. So this is not a new problem. As I say, I thought it was one we had put to bed by God's grace. It is back. I think we cannot ignore it. I think we have to, without being paranoid about it, we have to be biblical about it, and we have to be vigilant and think about our young people. I teach young people for a living. I teach at a secular university. I don't talk as openly as I am with you folks about this stuff, but I do think about this. One of my students think about Israel and the Jews, and you don't have to support everything Israel does. You don't have to like Benjamin Netanyahu. Criticism is welcome.
Right. Okay, so I have my final 4 questions. One question before that.
Yeah.
And this sort of pivots in.
Okay.
I asked the same 4 questions at the end there, just rapid fire.
All right.
So,
lightning round.
Lightning round, yes. But before that, what would you say to those gathered here? We have this dark conversation about, all manner of evil in your world. You're in the world, not your world, but in the world of political science and all these things.
Yeah.
So, what are you encouraging people to do?
Well, I do. So I teach at a university, and I'll talk about what I do and then what I encourage people to do. So what I do, I really, for years I've been trying to model disagreement. I build this disagreement into my course syllabi. All right. And then when I talk to fellow believers at church or at various, I try not to get pulled into political discussions, at least not right. I have political opinions, of course I do. I vote and I write and so on. But I try to resist falling into these discussions when I can, because they can take over very, very quickly. And I encourage people to, whatever is good, whatever is true, really focus on those things, as Paul called on us to do. That doesn't mean, believe me, we're citizens. We need to care and act and vote and write and think about public policy and politics. But we ought not, I think we must not become tribal in that deep sense that our country has become, right? So the practical things we can do are not avoid altogether talking about these things, but remember who we are. We are first and foremost followers of Christ. He died for us. He died for people who don't even know him yet. And the tribalism can get in the way very quickly of that. And for my students, I teach at a secular university, as I say. I can't talk as explicitly in that way, but I do encourage open disagreement, not so that every opinion can be validated, because some opinions are wrong and some are shaky, but so that we can sift and seek truth together. It's not easy, but it's vital that we do it. And I think we do that. We should do that within the church as well. And I think we're out of the habit as a country of doing that.
I read yesterday that nobody treats me as poorly as I've treated Christ. And we just need to have that understanding as we are absorbing barbs and...
Well put. Yeah.
Okay, the final 4 questions, just rapid fire. What, if anything, is keeping you up at night?
Ooh.
And with your daughter here, I'll say, almost everybody says, my kids.
My kids, yeah. Yeah, okay, that's disqualified as an answer. Committee work, that's too mundane, but the fact is I'm on a lot of committees. But I also...
Academic committees are horrible.
No, they're horrible. They're horrible. Yeah, especially now. Politics is everywhere, including in committees and in universities. So that's one thing. But I've said yes to serving on 2 committees because I do think, I like to think if I do my job properly, I'm bringing some reason and some anti-tribalism to... And I don't want to exaggerate. You know, I have great colleagues, but you know, they're human beings, and we live in the same society as everybody else, and so, but it does lead to some insomnia. Let's just say.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is on your nightstand?
Yes, a couple of books. All right, the one I'm reading. So 2 books right now. One I aspire to read, Marcel Proust. Remembrance of Things Past, which I read in college, and now in my 60s I want to read again. But man, at 10:30 p.m. I really have trouble. It's a beautifully translated French masterwork. So instead, my other daughter, not Alice, my daughter Frances, gave me for Christmas a book by Joe LeConte on Tolkien and Lewis, on tying their works of fantasy to the Second World War. The title escapes me now, but I don't know if you have had Joe or you know him, but it's a terrific, and it's much, at 10:30 at night I can handle it much better. It's a beautiful piece of work. So,
what book, podcast, Netflix series, Amazon product, or anything else have you been recommending more lately in the last 2 years to people, saying, you need to listen to this, watch this, buy this, go to this restaurant?
All right. Okay, so because I'm a political scientist who studies international relations, one of maybe the most helpful thing I've watched lately, it's about 4 or 5 years old, a Norwegian miniseries called Occupied, and it's not Christian, but it does get at the fear. You know, Norway, social democracy, very peace-loving. You know, they're not the Vikings anymore. They don't do that. They're very peaceful. They are really worried about Russia. It is a deep, deep fear, and not just the Norwegians, Northern Europeans in general, and Eastern Europeans. And
this guy right here was the, what was your title?
The Honorary Consul General for Norway to Chicago.
Okay, very good. Okay, so you know what yeah. So it's also well done, kind of disturbing, but it depicts a slow, subtle, and it's made up, but it's very good. High quality, slow, subtle Russian takeover of Norway. Again, I was more interested, less in the realism of it and more that what it's telling me about conditions in Europe right now.
You recommended that to me a couple years ago, and I watched it.
All right,
yes,
okay, very good.
Okay. And what do you, so we have your book that we're handing out, your most recent book, Ecology of Nations. What are you working on now?
I am finishing up a paper with a colleague that I'm enjoying, but I want to write a book now that kind of builds from this on visions of the good world from 4 great powers in the last century. Okay, the Soviet Union. So when I say good, it's not what you and I might regard as good. It's just the regime thought different visions. If Lenin or Bukharin or Stalin could have waved a wand and remade the world, what would that world look like? So Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, again, not what we would consider good, very gruesome, but there was a vision of what Hitler et al. Regarded as a better world. It wasn't just mindless violence, okay. The United States and today's China. And I'm going to do a comparison because I think the visions, no vision is perfectly enacted in the world by these countries, but the visions contain information about the world that the hegemon is seeking. I hope to write it myself. Yeah. So stay tuned. Stay tuned.
You need to write a 5th power, Revelation 20 through 22. Just bring in the final utopian vision. Yes.
Fair.
Okay.
There's my book.
The Man from the
Yeah, I mean, I read that book, Philip K. Dick. It's quite, and I know there's a mini-series about it. Yeah.
I'm going to jump in here and ask you to give Dr. Owen a hand.
Thank you.